What's going on? Welcome to Art Talk Music. For today's episode, I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm doing a solo podcast, just to take a minute to reflect on the 6 months that have passed since Art Talk Music began. It's been crazy. I love doing everything that I do in my life, which happens to consist of kind of what the title of this podcast is. I travel many months of the year all around the country doing art shows and art festivals with my pops, which is where I'm at right now. I'm in Florida, Southern Florida, to be specific, in Fort Lauderdale, doing a show this weekend in Delray Beach, and then continuing on to Sarasota, Florida, next weekend. And then I'm going to be turning up the musical, creative energies, juices, and get things happening in Bogalusa, Louisiana. I'm excited because I'm getting together with some old friends of mine, Mr. Arthur Metters, who's been on the podcast, and Mr. Logan Miles Nix, wonderful drummer. And it's a trio that I started playing with many, many years ago. I sort of met Logan. Well, I really met Logan at a recording session with my roommate, my dear friend, Mr. Ryan Montano, great trumpet player. We happened to be recording, at that time it was called Shepherd Studios. Now it's under another name, which I believe is Empty House Studio, belonging to Matthew Tobias. But we were recording Ryan's first album, and Logan was playing drums, and I was playing guitar. And it was awesome to meet a drummer that I really dug. We got to hang out and became close friends. He turned me on to all kinds of things. And when I talked to him about kind of playing and getting up, he had mentioned Arthur Metters. And at the time, after graduating from high school, from Manzano High School, I started, well, I guess right before I graduated, I started playing with this ska band, which was a ska band by the name of Made in Bangladesh. And they played quite a lot around the city of Albuquerque at the Launchpad and at Amp Performance Space and a couple other house parties and venues like that. And the drummer from that band, Mr. Joey Santiago, who's now playing with the Noms, happened to recommend to me and talk to me, him and this guitar player at the time who was also playing in Made in Bangladesh, Caleb. They mentioned to me about this bass player, Arthur Metters, and eventually I got to meet him. We were at a music store at Grandma's Music, to be official, and we were seeing a bass player do a music clinic. And afterwards I kind of, reached out and ended up meeting him and talking about getting together to play with Logan. So our friendship actually kind of began out of my necessity to find a great bass player and someone that I could play with my friend Logan that he dug. So the trio started playing in about 2010, 2011, and it changed a lot of the ways that I looked at what music could be. And I'm really grateful to Artie and Logan for that, because up to that point I was focusing on being the best guitar player I could, and I was studying jazz at the university and putting my energy towards that, instead of just playing and performing music that I loved, and specifically music that I was writing. And I continued writing music all throughout my years of playing other music, but when I started playing with Artie and Logan, that side of my brain really turned on, and I really paid a lot of attention, time, and focused my energy towards writing music with them. So since then, which was back in 2009 and 10 and 11, we really created something special that for many years since then we knew we needed to eventually get into the studio. And so it goes that the story of part 2 is going to be recorded in Louisiana with Arthur Metters and Logan Miles Nix. It's kind of the continuation. It is the continuation of why I decided to name the trilogy of the first couple albums that I put out as a solo artist, The Story of Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. I feel like as an artist, when you put out an album, it definitely defines who you are. And I wanted to redefine what that could mean for me and make the trilogy the first part of who I am, and use not just three separate albums to describe or really define and sing who I am, but also dispersing it in small bits. I mean, the first album is 32 minutes, and we're still gonna go. We have yet to go record the next album, so we'll see how long that is. But it's a part of trying to define who you are as an artist. And the idea from the get-go was to make a big album using three separate bands, which kind of defined the three different phases or stages of my musical career growing up. One being with Arthur Metters and Logan, one being with the friends in New Orleans that ended up being the whole band that I used for my first album, and the third being a mixture of Latin jazz, Latin salsa, Colombian influenced music, and some other music that I've written. And so I decided to disperse it up into a 3-part series. And that's kind of where I'm at musically on that front. Now, the podcast has been an amazing addition to my life for many reasons. It completes the art, talk, music trilogy, the idea of what is happening in my life and the things I want to focus my energy towards and dedicate my life towards. I really enjoy talking, and specifically I love breaking down some awesome, interesting people, like breaking down how their minds work, trying to get into their frame of how they create, why they do what they do, what inspires them, and how they practice, like how they do the things that we all do and try and figure out how to do better. How do you practice your scales? How do you practice your ability to have a different color palette? How do you practice your ability to write in sonnet form? I mean, getting to talk with poets and getting to talk with artists and musicians is part of the experience of finding out more of who I am, which is trying to be as creative on all fronts as I can be. Because I'm a songwriter, I write a lot. And the writings that I, happen to journal are not always songs or not always poems or not always journal entries. But, I mean, sometimes the writings themselves turn into little drawings. And that aspect of something I've always done has finally manifested itself into my life through making art. And in the past 4 or 5 years since I graduated from the University of New Mexico, I found the opportunity to really begin making art of my own, because I was going on the road with my dad and seeing all these amazing artists, some of them even younger than me, doing their thing. And I would ask and, inquire about how they got to where they were and what training they had and why they were doing this. And it really empowered me to just drop my fear of having big shoes to fill, because my father is a big painter and a sculptor, and just making sculptures for fun and making these drawings and these things that I noodled around into actual creations. And I was making metal sculptures, and I still am making all kinds of metal sculptures. I'm still working on my ability to sketch and draw. It's really hard, but I love it. And this past summer in 2018, I showed in my second art show up in Santa Fe at the Contemporary Hispanic Market, which is in conjunction with the Spanish Market, happening on Lincoln Avenue the last weekend in July up there in Santa Fe. And it was amazing because this past summer, I got to show a lot of new sculptures that I've been working on, some things that I painted with oil, so really trying to bring in the color aspect to making a fabricated sculpture, making these abstract people and then painting them and finding a way to seal that oil painted sculpture so that people can have it outdoors if they want to. And it will be fine in the snow and in the rain and not oxidize and start turning orange or any other color that you don't want. So the show this past summer was awesome for me, and I got this commission to make this big sculpture. And I believe it was the podcast that I did with Hakeem Bellamy. We're talking into the conversation, maybe about 30, 40 minutes into the conversation. I know that conversation so well because if you go back and listen to it, Hakeem asked me to bleep out all of the F words. Every time I said fuck or he said fuck, I would go back and bleep that out using my little synthesizer. So I listened to the whole conversation, but within the conversation, we talk about when people impose some big challenge on you and you as a creative person take it on, even if you don't know how the hell you're going to do it. And that happened amazingly with this gentleman whose wife had walked by the show and saw my booth and didn't even talk to me, but picked up one of my cards, and her husband looked at my artwork on my website after the show. And on Sunday, that next day, wrote me an email asking me if I would be interested in making them a 12-foot tall exclamation point. And I jumped at the idea of making it for them, showed my dad, who was in the next booth over, and we talked about, the logistics, and I wrote them this long email. And we talked back and forth for a little while, for a couple months, and eventually I started working on it. And we got it to their home in November. And it was so exciting to see how everything came together, how beautiful it turned out in November, I installed that sculpture in September. It happened actually the same weekend that I had the pleasure of being the host, the MC, for the second day and being the house band for the first day of the TEDx ABQ event that happened at the National Hispanic Cultural Center. So of course I can't forget that ever, because that was the last weekend in September. And I did, Friday night was the house band for the opening night of the TEDx event. And then Saturday was the MC all day. And the next morning, Sunday, I drove up with my friends that helped me install the sculpture and installed in two parts this giant 3-dimensional, 12 foot tall, standing as if it's floating exclamation point. And it was an amazing thing and had so many awesome synchronicities with, the TEDx event being all this red and black, and the exclamation point that I made was red and black. And it was quite a statement, quite a time in my life. And so even symbolically, to make that exclamation point for this guy who basically asked me if I could make this thing that he wanted. And so I did it, and I'm so glad I did. It was an amazing learning experience, and the second commission that I'd gotten to make some sculptures, and more commissions have come from just that endeavor. And I'm so grateful to not be scared of trying to do something and pursue a love and a passion that I have. And it's come back tenfold and benefited me financially, spiritually, emotionally, and creatively. And this podcast, as well as this time in my life, feels like the point in my life that I truly do feel like I'm walking in the right path, or as I like to say sometimes, the path is unfolding in front of me. And I'm just riding the wave, and I love it. Now, I have a lot of favorite podcasts. I listen to a lot. I always recommend a lot to people that go on the road and travel. And so being an MMA fanatic, because my oldest brother was an MMA fighter for many years, and I listened to this one show by this gentleman named Ariel Helwani, and he does a best of show at the end of the year for the 9 years that he's been doing his podcast. And so I started doing a best of the first 6 months and the first 25 episodes that I'd done up to that point. And I didn't get to finish it before I hit the road, which, like I said, I'm in Florida, and I'm here traveling up until late February, and then we'll be traveling a little bit more in March. But it's been awesome to re-examine the conversations that I've had, re-examine over 6 months those 25 episodes that I put out, and also in talking with dear friends of mine and people that I trust and value their opinions to really get their take on what I could be doing better and what was great, but what I need to work on. And I know that my standard keeps getting higher, and I look forward to executing the opportunity to put out an episode every single week to you guys and make it better every time and find better guests and set the bar higher for myself to try and reach and get the best people that I can imagine bringing to you guys in the art world, in the talking world, if that's poetry, writing, even if that's just traveling and vlogging and living. Obviously music, as you can tell, because a lot of my guests, the majority of my guests have been musicians. And I love it. I mean, I look forward to another year looking into the lens of creative people from all walks of life and digesting not just a little bit of how their mind works, but trying to also take some of their ideas of how they go about creating and using them in our own lives. I thank you guys. It's been such a ride, and I appreciate people listening and people writing and giving me a little bit of feedback about what they think, the episodes that they like, the episodes they didn't like. All of it is constructive for me and definitely teaches me about how I can do it better. So moving forward, I definitely plan on putting that best of 2018 podcast out, but it looks like it'll have to wait until maybe the end of February or even March. And speaking of the end of March, from the opportunity to make sculptures and make music and get to do podcasting and see the world a little bit, I'm going to do one of the favorite trips that I love making every year or as often as I can, which is going down to Colombia in March. And I'll be recording a song or two that will also go on the story of part 2. And I'm really excited about that. And to perform again in the beautiful country that my mother and father are from. And that's also a beautiful aspect of the story of part 2, this next album that I'm putting out, because there will be some music in Spanish. Spanish was my first language, and so I feel like it's definitely time to make my grandmother happy, as she always asks me to sing her something that she can understand. So I'm excited for that. It's been a couple months since my cousin went back, but the reason also that I'm going to be recording some of the songs for the part 2 album in Colombia is because my cousin on my mom's side of the family is an amazing piano player. His name's Diego Gomez. And I've been having the opportunity to work with him and this Colombian pop singer that he works with named Raquel. And we've been writing some songs. And so one of those songs is going to go on the album. It's called El Avión. And you'll hear eventually what the song is about, but because I'm sure a lot of people might not understand Spanish, it's about a girl and meeting a girl on a plane. And the guy and the girl are both looking for love. And boarding that plane, they're hoping to maybe find that love. And so I'm going to go record that song with him, as well as another song that is a cumbia. And I feel like it's only right that I go get the people who play those rhythms so well, because they're from the place that the music came from. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I'll definitely be documenting stuff and recording podcasts in Spanish. That's right. I've got a lot of friends that I'd love to get on the podcast. And those conversations will just have to happen in Spanish because their English is not so good. And it just allows for better conversation that way and them to speak more freely. But certainly there will be some people who mostly speak in Spanish and that I'm sure will want to speak in English, as the challenge. And I love that. So moving forward, I definitely just want to give a couple shout outs within the podcasts that I've done and some of the amazing things that have come up from the podcast guests that I've had and the experiences of being around these people. As you might have guessed, there's a huge relationship between the city of New Orleans and me, as well as the podcast guests. And I'm connected with this wonderful record label by the name of Bubble Bath Records. If you didn't know, now you know. I recommend you go check out bubblebathrecords.com. I'm definitely going to put a link within the description of this podcast to the Bubble Bath site. I'm a bubble bath artist, as well as many of the guests on my podcasts. On my podcast, that includes Mr. Greg Agid, wonderful clarinetist and saxophonist, the wonderful singer, Miss Cristina Morales, my man Arthur Metters from Albuquerque. Him with Joseph Scott have a band called Citizens of Tape City that are also signed to Bubble Bath Records. We've also got Max Moran, who put out his album through Bubble Bath, and the man John Maestas, who of course is one of the founding members of Bubble Bath. So it's a lot of love for the BBR crew within the podcast, and I look forward to having more guests on the podcast. It's a wonderful platform to be able to help people promote their albums coming out and the work that they're doing. And I love that. It's a pleasure to have friends of mine that I admire on to talk about their most recent creative endeavors, and me getting to pick their brains a little bit about how the experience was for them and what we could share about how to do it better the next time, because it's always a learning process. So another one of the amazing guests that I had on my podcast is the great Mr. O. And that's David Ostrovitz, but better known to everyone who happened to be a guitar student from the 70s up until the late 2000s, of Mr. O, the guitar teacher over at Manzano High School. So my man John Maestas and I got an email a while ago, and it was shouting out an idea from a teacher from Manzano High School, Miss Robane Harrison, who had written us and said, "Claudio, John, please help us out. We really want to get this thing happening," which was APS. It's, I do believe, the APS Hall of Honor, and they were accepting nominations. And I wrote John, and we discussed about how we can find the right people to write letters of recommendations and help find the teacher that could put it all together, because of course the nominator had to be an APS teacher who has also been retired for a couple of years. And so we got my choir teacher, Mrs. Carla Erickson, to help nominate Mr. O. And me and John put together all the work to find the letters of recommendation, do them ourselves, as well as submit the application. And we got Mr. O nominated to be honored as one of the recipients into the Hall of Honor for this year. So March 22nd is also going to be an awesome month to celebrate that man. So if you haven't heard that podcast, I recommend you go back and check it out. It was a great episode with the man, the myth, the legend, as he's known to everyone that attended Manzano and that was in his class. Now, as I travel, I look forward to doing more podcasts with amazing people in the cities that I go to. So I look forward to being in Sarasota next week and trying to get in a podcast with an amazing artist that lives out there, as well as going to Louisiana. There's a couple of musical artists that I've been in communication with. So I look forward to bringing you so much more in the next couple months and in the next year. That's right, 2019. I know it's already Thursday, January 17th, but it definitely is going to be an amazing year. and I'm excited. So what have you got going on? Write me, tell me, comments. I'm going to post this all to Facebook, to my website, and to the website of my podcast, which is through my hosting company. So that's arttalkmusic.libsyn. That's LIBSYN.com. You might be listening to it through this website without even knowing it because you just clicked the link on my Facebook page or my Instagram. But anyways, I appreciate you listening so much. And if you haven't subscribed, if you haven't told a friend about it, please do. I always appreciate that. And I appreciate the love and support from you guys. Like I said, I'm going to be working to bring you the best guests I possibly can and raise the bar for myself as far as who I bring you guys and who I try and bring on the show. So thank you for listening. And I'm going to play a little something on the way out that you might enjoy. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your weekend. If you're listening to this on Monday, then I hope you're about to have an amazing week. And I'll look forward to bringing you another episode next Thursday here on Art Talk Music. Thank you again for listening and have a wonderful night. All right, one more note. I mentioned on my Instagram and on my Facebook page that I was going to be putting out the episode with the great Howard Cloud, and that episode happens to still be on my iMac desktop back home. So, of course, I'll be putting that episode out a little bit later, probably not this next week, but the week after that. So please be patient with that, and I appreciate you listening. I mentioned we're going to play something special here, so this is a sneak peek to a song that, well, if you happen to have seen me live, you've heard me play many times. This is a song I wrote called Ella, and this is from the practice that me and Mr. Logan Nix and Arthur Metters had. So you're hearing it pretty raw, and you're hearing us talk throughout it. But of course, this is a sneak peek of what you're going to get on the story of Part 2. This is Ella.